A few words before I give floor to Dr. Yazdanpanah. First of all, I would like to tell my colleagues here at Sabancı University why I think it's a great idea and a privilege to have Dr. Yazdanpanah here. The reason is simple. In the morning sessions before the keynote, our Vice President, James Unity, responsible for education, he said that we have this vision of becoming an international university. And this year's theme is what will be our new normal. And as you all know, digitization kind of made it easier to reach to wider audiences. So probably in the near future, internationalization of a university and digitization of higher education will be going hand in hand. So when I was thinking about the theme of this conference, I was thinking that maybe we should spend more time thinking about how to manage pluralistic structures like a university, especially which wants to be more international. This is how I ended up with our valuable keynote lecturer, Dr. Ramin Yazdanpanah, because Sabancı University is growing, it's becoming more internationalized, and I think for us and for higher education institutions around the world, it's always good to think more about how to manage that pluralistic reality in a way. Pardon me for a second. I'll be checking my notes to introduce you, Dr. Yazdanpanah. Ramin currently works as a director of Full Circle Language Learning, LLC. He holds a doctorate from Florida State University for his research on developing intercultural competence within English language teacher programs through focused intercultural exchanges with English language learners. He has over 20 years of experience as an English language teacher and over a decade of experience as a teacher educator. Dr. Yazdanpanah served as a TEFL Certificate Program Director at the Center for Intensive Studies at Florida State University. He was awarded a fellowship with the US State Department in Vietnam, where he taught and developed courses and curriculum at Thai Nguyen University, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and facilitated workshops throughout the country. He continues to serve as a consultant to the US Department's English language programs, as well as with the Learning Systems Institute at Florida State University, the TESOL International Association, and the Florida Department of Education. Dr. Yazdanpanah has delivered numerous presentations and workshops on English language teaching and research, and served as the chair of TESOL Intercultural Interest Section, ICIS. In addition to his academic work, he also facilitates intercultural education through music performances and workshops in the United States and internationally. Dr. Ramin Yazdanpanah brings his experience and expertise in foreign and second language teaching, teacher education, and intercultural competence and communication program and development. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce you to Dr. Yazdanpanah. Please, dear colleague, this floor is yours.
Thank you so much. All right. Hello, everybody. Hello. So let me just use this clicker here.
It won't work. I'll be helping you manually.
Okay.
Don't worry. Whenever you click, that will work.
Okay. Let me see, make sure it works here on my computer. Oh, hold on one second. So do I need to be on Zoom right now, or can I exit out of here?
You can exit.
Okay.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. For all of us adapting to the digital reality.
That is our reality.
It's still a challenge, as you can see.
All right. No, I was just thinking there that, you know, when you're talking about glitches, you know, we should have something like glitch happens, right? So, well, I appreciate being here. It feels so good to be in a physical space, giving a talk, because I'm sure, like, you know, many of us here in the room and online We've been doing this online for the past 2.5 years. So it's sometimes you kind of forget the value of actually being in a physical space, being able to see people's smiles, and just feeling the kind of energy, between people is something that I really value and appreciate. So it's good to be here. It's good to be here in this beautiful space on this beautiful campus as well. So I just would like to again just express my gratitude for being here. To participate in events like these, to share my experiences and potentially spark creativity and ideas within others is perhaps the most, exciting thing professionally. And just listening to the speakers today has already sparked things within me. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your creativity, your genius, and your vision about things. I would especially like to thank my friend here, Dr. Amrero, for his support. In order to prepare accordingly for any kind of occasion like this, it's so important to know the expectations, the culture, the diverse experiences of the people who are in the audience, and just kind of what's the thinking behind the conference. So I'm grateful for your clarity, your honesty, your clear communication, your willingness to exchange ideas. This is exactly the kind of synergetic collaboration that is central to my talk today about leveraging our pluralistic identities that each one of us possesses towards building stronger communities of learning and teaching. And so speaking of community building, if you are in the room, if you can, please just say hi to the person next to you. Okay, you can even say marhaba if you like, all right? So just say hello. Okay, just say your name if you don't know each other. If you're on the chat, you can, introduce yourself as well. Maybe say your name, where are you tuning in from, zooming in from. Okay. Okay, so starting with the bigger picture here, this graph is based on data from UNESCO's Institute for Statistics. And it shows the number of students who migrate internationally for higher education purposes up to 2016. As we can see, the numbers of internationally mobile students has been increasing globally. These individuals are also called degree mobile students to emphasize the fact that they would be granted a foreign degree and to distinguish them from credit mobile students who are on short exchange or study abroad trips. The length of stay is typically for more than a year and up to 7 years. And, thank you to the Vice President for providing kind of numbers more relevant here to Sabancha. So as the world becomes increasingly interconnected and culturally diverse, the internationalization of education become a major goal of many universities. And we heard that echoed through the Vice President's statements as well. Now, Turkey's tendency towards being a part of the international student market has become more important as of 2010, as we can see here. Oh, is this? Yeah, got it. Nice, all right. As you can see here, okay, has become more important as of 2010. We can see in this chart here provided by Turkey's Council of Higher Education, as with any shift in demographics, there are opportunities and challenges. As research and Turkish scholar Serdar Ünal explains on the topic of international migration of students to Turkey in the 21st century, and I will scroll here. The increase in diversity of student populations adds new perspectives to classroom conversations and can increase our awareness and appreciation for other countries and cultures. And I want to extend that to not only students, but also faculty. Okay, I see the international faculty that's present in the room, and that's so lovely to see, and I'm sure the university appreciates that as well. In this sense, foreign students and faculty are valuable assets as they contribute academically, culturally, and financially to universities and host countries. However, the diversification of student profiles at university campuses can bring issues as well. One of which is related to the adaptation process of foreign students to the host society that includes on campus and in classrooms. So for one, I hope that we all can agree that international students here on campus are indeed valuable assets. And even more than that, essential to the goal and mission of Sabancı University, to continue to be one of the top universities in Turkey and the world. Therefore, everything possible should be done to support both international and domestic students in feeling welcomed and feeling seen on campus and in classrooms. As part of this support, programming and curriculum should seek to actively build communities of learning that explicitly value and leverage the diverse experiences and perspectives of all students on campus. I hope that whether you're from Turkey, a country from the Middle East, Africa, Europe, or the Americas, we can see a commonality in each other. As diverse individuals who all have pluralistic identities beyond the color of our skin or place of birth, and are all here to further and better themselves. Okay, so what do I mean by pluralistic identities? So plural, of course, okay, means more than one. Our language educators here, okay, that's the basics. So viewing ourselves with pluralistic instead of singular identities better reflects the dynamic and complex makeup of us individuals. This is especially relevant in the formative years of university students who are coming into their own as individuals, as well as creating academic and professional identities. And I can tell those university students that that continues to happen, right, over the course of our lives. It just doesn't stop after you graduate and receive a degree. This mindset is especially relevant as we find ourselves dealing with new and often unexpected challenges more and more frequently. These past 2.5 years have been proof of that, and this is not likely to change. It might not be the tsunami, right? It might be another kind of tsunami, right? It might not be a pandemic tsunami. It might be a shift in how we do things, right? Artificial intelligence is one of those big tsunamis that has been predicted to be on its way. So in the spirit of sharing some of my own pluralistic identities, and I had the pleasure of speaking and sharing, doing a little exchange in the audience earlier, I want to let you know one of my current identities. In this case, is a Turkish language learner, a very low beginner Turkish language learner, okay? So one of my favorite words in Turkish has become the word evet. So one reason is because evet is simple. It's frequently used. You can say it and nod your head and pretend like you know what's going on. But it's also one of my favorite words for another very important reason that I'll explain at the very end of this presentation. So at times I may ask you a question and ask you to respond to me, if you would, with evet. Okay. Is that okay? Evet. Thank you so much. My language people here, they get it. All right, so thank you. Teşekkür ederim. Oops, let me actually go back. Sorry, my mouse tends to disappear. Okay. So looking at some of these images here, the first image at the top is of me and my two brothers many years ago. Can you tell which one is me? Okay. Close. We do look like each other now. But it's actually the youngest guy with that goofy smile on his face. Okay. So this is this identity of an individual who grew up as a multicultural minority in the United States of America. This was specifically taken in the early 80s in Miami. The second image is of me here as a musician of diverse instruments of different cultures and an amateur ethnomusicologist. And the third image is as a foreign and second language educator and researcher. This is actually some of my work, as you were saying, Emre, in Vietnam, as a fellow with the State Department. And yes, that Nguyen is actually Nguyen. So now you know, all right? Which is also a popular Vietnamese name. So that can come in handy one of these days. All right, it's also my hope that the examples I will share with you will shed light on how you can help to leverage not only your own identities, but also others' pluralistic identities. We're all educators here. And I know that that's important to us to do as educators. And in the spirit of this, try to build more culturally inclusive and supportive classroom and campus. And through these examples, I hope that they will shed light on that. Okay, so the first identity that I will share with you, and I'm grateful for this big, beautiful screen here so you can see all these images, is that of a son to a Cuban mother and an Iranian father. Can you tell which side is Cuban and which side is Iranian? Okay, all right. So they met in the United States, and they after moving to Iran and then having to leave Iran in the late 70s, started to raise their family in the United States in the 1980s. So I don't know, all of you look pretty young here. So I don't know if you remember, you know, the kind of climate and the environment in the 80s between Iran and the United States. Even much more kind of hostile, you know, than it is even today, right? And so this collage was an activity in exploring self-identity as well as stereotypes in media and society that I experienced in my life. And as you can see, it's complicated. As a Cuban Iranian American or Cubanian American, as I like to call myself, there was no shortage of stereotypes that I had to deal with, and almost on a daily basis. So here we have political images, right? We could see these angry Iranians here burning the American flag. We see images, obviously, of Castro and Che. I don't know if any of you are wrestling fans, but in the 80s, we had colorful characters like the Iron Sheik, okay, who represented Iran. And of course, Hulk Hogan, okay, who represented the United States. So these were the conflicts. But we also see kind of images here of you know, family, of Nowruz, of some of my trips to Iran, and of course, my upbringing here in Florida. I love this picture because I still love bicycles, all right? And I see where that came from. So I have to say that the good times overwhelmingly outweigh the bad, and my childhood and adult life have been filled with wonderful experiences, good friends of all colors and genders. But these experiences definitely required me to reflect on my own identity at a very early age, and at times attempt to explain foreign policy, history, and cultural perspectives that were often unclear to me as well. What is clear now is that these aspects of my identity are central to how I see and understand myself, my interests, and my professional work as an educator of language, culture, and communication. Nevertheless, stereotypes continue to exist, and we see that in the media to this day. And what happens with stereotypes is that they limit our understanding of the world and the people in it. So novelist Chimamanda Adichie discusses her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and warns that if we hear only a single story about another person or a country, we risk critical misunderstanding. As we can read in this image, the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And Adichie goes on to state the consequence of this single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. Adichie's work as an author and professor of literature and writing also points to the necessity for diverse cultures, people, genders, and perspectives to be represented in school curriculum so that we can expand our school libraries as well as our internal libraries to have a more sophisticated understanding of how we see the world and how we see each other. Of course, another very real issue with stereotypes is the dangerous side effect known as unconscious bias. So unconscious bias can be defined as what happens when we act on subconscious, deeply ingrained biases, stereotypes, and attitudes formed from our expectations, upbringing, and environment. When we act solely on our gut instincts, knee-jerk reactions, or assumptions, there's a chance that we are opening ourselves up to unconscious bias. This can mean people affected by your actions might be unfairly discriminated against or favored without you even realizing, even if you don't believe in these stereotypes. The image that we see here illustrates a well-known example of how in the 1970s and 80s in the United States, orchestras began to implement blind auditions, where a screen was placed between musicians and those judging their performance. Musicians auditioning were also directed to take off their shoes before walking on stage as to not signal who was wearing higher heels than others. In an article titled Orchestrating Impartiality, published in 2000 in the American Economic Review, the researchers concluded that the screen increases by 50% the probability that a woman will be advanced from a certain preliminary rounds, and increases by several-fold the likelihood that a woman will be selected in final round. According to the most recent information from the League of American Orchestras, the percentage of women instrumentalists has gone from 38.2% in 1978. That's the earliest year that these records were kept, and already after the first screened auditions, to nearly 50% today. Some individual orchestras have up to 60% women. So you can see that the only thing that changed was not the performance or the quality, okay, of those auditioning. It was just the ability for people to judge someone off their merit, right? And not off their gender in this case. And I don't think that the judges were intending to do that, but there are kind of unconscious biases. They're called unconscious for a reason, right? Because we're not aware of them. They affect how we might react to others. And this is true as students, as teachers as well. It's true for students as we engage and we see others around us. So we need to do things to kind of like address these unconscious biases as much as possible in class. And I think we have opportunities to do that, right? So another identity of mine is as a musician. Does everyone like music here? Who doesn't? Okay, who doesn't? So these images you see, yes. So these images you see here are my band, the Maharaja Flamenco Trio. Have you guys ever heard of flamenco music? Yes. Okay. So, you know, with the band, we've been engaging in performances and educational workshops for the past 11 years now. And I would put up images that we've been doing on Zoom, but generally when you do performances with students, you can't take images, right? So that's just against the policy. But you can see that that's kind of our mission here is to provide musical performances as well as engage with students about the musical styles and utilize the music and this style of flamenco to teach about Spanish culture, to teach about the Roma or Gitano peoples that have formed flamenco, as well as the different instruments that I'll talk to you about a little bit here as well. So music in general and flamenco in particular has the ability to communicate, channel, and connect us to the past, settle us in the present moment, and give us glimpses of the future through the instruments, song, and dance. Music and the arts are a shared aspect of all cultures and can facilitate dialogue and exchange of ideas and identity that reduces otherness by connecting us through a shared human experience of human expression, music. Universities such as Sabacha can serve as a perfect environment for such artistic performances and academic exchange. And I'm so happy to hear that there's a beautiful performance arts center here. And hopefully starting in the fall, that will be utilized again, okay, for such musical performances, artistic experiences that are really essential for students here on campus, given the kind of location, right, of the campus kind of far removed. So creating these experiences, not only for entertainment reasons, but they can also be leveraged and utilized for some kind of cultural exchange as well, and cultural learning. So the instruments that I play, does anyone know what this instrument is called? Yeah. Okay, of course, yes, didgeridoo. All right, can everybody say didgeridoo? Didgeridoo. Emre says, no, I can't. All right, and Emre, thank you so much for saying my last name so beautifully. All right, I'd like to acknowledge that. So the instrument that I play also represent various cultures of the world that come with their own education in music, art, geography, history, politics, economics, and language studies. Yes, the first image that we see here is of the didgeridoo, one of the world's oldest instruments. From the world's oldest continuous surviving people, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. Combined with song and dance, the didgeridoo, also known as yidaki, is utilized by Aboriginal communities to pass on creation stories and life lessons tens of thousands of years old. Looking at the image on the bottom, we can see does anybody know what this instrument is called? This is for 100 points here. This is actually called cajon, okay? And cajon means box, right? So it's actually a box drum that comes from the Afro-Peruvian and Afro-Cuban cultures of Peru, Cuba, and the region. And it really has come about out of the slave trade, okay? When African slaves in Peru and Cuba, using their ingenuity, their creativity, created new instruments. And so this instrument, that cajon, was created as a lot of the musicians at the time were also working on the shipping kind of decks. And so they refined this box to be a beautiful musical instrument that is actually used. He's telling people about the cajon right now. That is actually used globally now, right? When I go down to the area in Taksim area, right, where you get musical instruments, you see cajons there. And you see amazing Turkish percussionists that are incorporating the cajon into kind of contemporary Turkish music now as well. All right, let's see how this works out. This is, are you ready to, I'm tired, I need a break from lecturing. Are you guys wanting to hear some of this music? Okay, all right. So hopefully this is gonna work. And I'll just play a little bit of clip from me playing the didgeridoo and the cajon with my band, the Maharaja Flamenco Trio. And this song is called Hey Yidaki. So yidaki is also another name for the didgeridoo, all right? So next time someone asks you, do you know what this instrument is? Everyone's gonna say, you know, or some people might say didgeridoo, or you can also say yidaki, okay? Yidaki is an Aboriginal name. So here it goes. Let's see if this works. I'm just playing it now.
Ramin, I think you need to play from that.
Okay, all right.
And now it's playing on that system, I think. Oh.
This is asking too much of our RT people. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Oh, there it is. This guy, he just looked it up on YouTube on the fly. Amazing. It was there. We can just play some Turkish music too. That's fine. It's okay, don't worry. All right, you get the idea though, right? You saw some of the video. If you'd like, okay, if you are interested in hearing some of this, you can actually go to the website. It's very easy. It's mftrio.com, okay? And you can explore some of our music. You might like it. Okay.
We just have move on, right?
What's that?
Shall we move on, or should we try to?
If he can get it, that would be great. But if not, we can just move on. It's okay. I should have brought a didgeridoo with me. Next time. Next time. You got it? Yoke. I know yoke too. Okay. All right. All right. No problem. Glitch happens, right? So let's see. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right. So one of the final identities of mine that I like to share is that of an educator and researcher. And we can see here in my dissertation research that this has laid the foundation of much of what I do of my professional work, as well as some of the work I do as a teacher educator. What I would like to share with you is a model of intercultural competence development that I applied in my research as a teacher educator of pre-service teachers in the United States. As Emre discussed here, and why I feel so connected here to my School of Languages people, is this is where I worked for a good number of years, okay, at the Center for Intensive English Studies at Florida State University. So I recognize in this, and I see the amazing work that you all are doing, okay? So I congratulate you, I applaud you for what you do. So I think this model can give you insight on some different dimensions of intercultural education that you might find useful for your context. First, I'd like to start with a key term that is important and relevant today for today's discussion and to your classrooms, and that's cultural variations of learning and teaching. So cultural variations of learning and teaching is how culture, there we go. It's how culture, identity, and experience affect one's learning processes, expectations, and behaviors. As we can see by just viewing these images of different classrooms around the world, we see visible differences of classroom layout, dress, gender, student seating, etc. But just as importantly, if not more so, we should also be aware of the invisible aspects of cultural variations, such as expectations of participation, personal space, collaboration, communication styles, risk-taking, and the list goes on. One was mentioned as far as like academic integrity, right? That could be a cultural variation that we have to discuss in the classroom, especially with international students. Another can be, we saw some beautiful writing lessons, different expectations of organization of writing, right? Of rhetorical styles. So what tends to happen, however, is that teachers, of course not you, but other teachers, tend to minimize cultural difference, believing that the rules of student and teacher behavior that govern one's first culture apply equally to all cultures and contexts. So using this model here, this continuum of Milton Bennett's developmental model of intercultural sensitivity, we can see a continuum to describe one's intercultural position and stages of intercultural growth. The two main categories are of ethnocentrism and ethno-relativism. As Bennett describes, ethnocentrism refers to the experience of one's own culture as central to reality, as well as ways of avoiding cultural difference, either by denying its existence by raising defenses against it, or by minimizing its importance. In contrast, ethno-relativism is the experience of one's beliefs and behaviors as just one organization of reality among many viable possibilities. As mentioned before, minimization, we tend to get stuck in minimization. And minimization describes a worldview where one sees actions, behaviors, and beliefs only through universal truths, blindly believing that the rules that govern one's first culture apply equally to all cultures and contexts. Particularly for people of a dominant culture, minimization tends to mask recognition of their own culture and the institutional privilege it affords its members. Because people at this stage no longer experience others in a polarized way, they tend to overestimate their racial and ethnic appreciation. While they may be tolerant, people at the stage of minimization are unable to fully appreciate others' cultures because they cannot fully see and appreciate their own culture clearly. And I can tell just by talking to you all here that you can appreciate. You do see your own culture. You can appreciate others' cultures because you have, well, one, you've experienced foreign language learning, right? Many of you have probably lived and studied abroad, and you work with diverse students, right? So you have to be open to this. But for instance, if you cannot see communication or even teaching style as a cultural pattern, I think that everyone does, or if they could, use the same style. So consequently, you judge the failure for others to use your style as a lack of social skill or as a choice to be an alternative and outside the norm. Either of these judgments misses the point that the other people may just naturally be using a culturally different style. Click here. A key point here is the inability to see one's first culture. Like a fish that doesn't see the water, individuals at this stage do not realize the culturally influenced behaviors and expectations they bring to the interaction or space. The research within intercultural studies and teacher professional development clearly state that we as educators must understand how our own rather narrow perspectives and experiences may influence our abilities to accurately perceive and understand our students, as well as the inherently narrow environments in which we work. As research clearly points out, and I discussed earlier, we all have unconscious biases that affect our behavior. So what to do about it? Well, first of all, it takes time. And it's clearly an everlasting endeavor, okay, that we need to work on really daily. But what we can do as educators, is model the process of intercultural development in our classrooms and on campus. So for the sake of clarity, presented here is a simplified model of Darla Deerdorf's process model of intercultural competence. As the name implies, this is a process of intercultural development that needs to be reinforced and repeated, much like all learning processes. The model starts with attitude. And so this is described as basic respect for others, openness to withhold judgment, a curiosity to learn and discover. Without a willingness to learn, making progress can be difficult. So providing a clear rationale of the importance and benefits of intercultural learning, specifically to students, as well as to other faculty, is important, and more than important, critical. Next on the model is knowledge. Knowledge of oneself and knowledge of others. Much like the example we saw earlier with the cultures, different cultures represented across classrooms, we saw visible aspects of culture and we discussed the invisible. We should try to move beyond surface level aspects of culture and identity to deeper and less obvious ways we think and understand the world. And in my experience, this is a skill that needs to be developed. it can be difficult to articulate a cultural perspective. It can be difficult sometimes to kind of like communicate what your identity is. So it takes time. It takes time to reflect. It takes time to plan. And it takes some modeling and scaffolding. So with time, critical to the process of the development of knowledge is skills to listen, observe, and evaluate, as well as to analyze, interpret, and relate. I think we can all agree that these are critical thinking skills, important to develop and apply to all aspects of life. And with time, internal outcomes can develop. A shift in one's informed frame of reference to a more ethno-relative stance, and the ability to be flexible, adapt, and empathize is the goal. This can be measured through the use of questionnaires, interviews, as well as focus group discussions. Maybe even integrate them ideally into what you're already doing in class, right? Those essay examples could be a good one. Those speaking, right, prompts could be another way. The goal, of course, is to develop the external outcome of more effective communication across contexts and cultures, as well as a greater capacity to develop intercultural competence autonomously and throughout our daily lives. I think that word autonomous learner is something that we all are trying to strive for because there's only a limited amount that we can do, right? In the classroom, even on campus. These are really skills that we're trying to instill. It's kind of like teaching someone how to fish, right? Instead of giving them the fish. So students benefit from the time and space to think and reflect before trying to articulate their perspectives. And information gathered from students in the form of journals or surveys can be useful in designing activities that are appropriate for the context of your classroom. Creating activities and opportunities for students to reflect and share their identities, strengths, needs, expectations, and cultures of learning can be done at the beginning, middle, and end of each semester through needs analysis, questionnaires, and student feedback forms. When ready for more interactional activities, we can also facilitate environments in class and on campus to support this process. And I'd like to share with you an example of such an activity. So the video we see here is from a series of cultural exchange workshops that I organized and co-facilitated with the support of my colleagues between international students, in-service faculty, and pre-service teachers. We utilized a process model we just looked at to design and facilitate weekly exchanges focusing on different aspects of culture, identity, stereotypes, language, as well as cultures of language, cultures of learning and teaching. And with all the beautiful spaces here on campus, you can see how, you can facilitate similar kind of exchanges between students.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think it's okay now.
But you need to close the
Oh yeah, just click that X out this X. Yeah, thank you. Oops. There you go. It's okay if you can't do that. Don't worry. So the capstone project for this kind of exchange was actually a poster presentation that participants collaborated on in small groups, comparing and explaining their diverse cultures of learning. Student posters were then presented and shared in an open gallery walk with other students, faculty, and staff. To give an example of what was shared, for many of our students, for example, from China, in their experiences, eye contact in the classroom can often be viewed as being challenging and disrespectful to students. Where in the US, eye contact communicates interest and engagement. This can lead to misperceptions of Chinese students as not being confident, as well as to lead to uncertainty of Chinese students and how to participate in class. For some of the Saudi students, working in groups with the opposite gender was initially difficult. Being able to openly express and explain why this was the case from their individual and collective perspectives helped to create an environment where asking uncomfortable questions was scaffolded and encouraged, creating a more empathetic position by other students. So it's kind of one of those things where, you know, if you don't communicate, things get worse. And once you can actually just kind of ask questions and communicate your ignorance about something, it gets better, right? Things get to be aired out and addressed. Now, I will say that this has to be facilitated, modeled, and scaffolded. So people do this in a very respectful kind of way, right? And that's something, especially as language educators and experts in communication, that we can do. So through the sharing of these similarities and differences on a topic relevant and important to all participants, a community of learning was co-created, allowing us to create a unique culture, kind of like a third space culture, where the expression and sharing of cultural differences and pluralized identities was valued. So we can see here some of the posters, and it was great for, you know, as language educators, this was just excellent practice for students to have to explain, to articulate, right? Identity, articulate culture, do comparison and contrast between cultures, right, and languages, and do that in a repetitive kind of fashion, because different people would keep coming around to that same poster, right? So as we know, as educators, that's a real big goal of ours, is to kind of repeat and reinforce, right, certain performance so that students can build confidence and we can give feedback. We did a lot of preparation for this kind of project-based activity, but it was well worth it. And I don't know if this clicker is still working. I can just, maybe, should I just click here? Okay, here we go. Thank you. So I'd like to share with you this quote here. And these kinds of collaborative activities can and should be applied in a number of different subject areas. Such intercultural skill sets also help in the development of critical thinking, needed to sort through the overwhelming influx of information and misinformation that we are really inundated with daily. So this professor of cultural anthropology, Michael Wesch, I'll read this out for you, in developing knowledge-able skills. This new media environment can be enormously disruptive to our current teaching methods and philosophies. As we increasingly move toward an environment of instant and infinite information, it becomes less important for students to know, memorize, or recall information, and more important for them to be able to find, sort, analyze, share, discuss, critique, and create information. They need to move from being simply knowledgeable to being knowledge-able. Okay, so as a final example of what could be done on the campus-wide level, here's an example from my alma mater, organized by what's called as the Center for Global Engagement, as they call themselves the Globe. So an easy way to motivate students to come together for exchange on campus is by giving students free food and creating an inviting atmosphere. So we can see in this image that the Globe hosts they call it the International Coffee Hour. It's weekly for 1 hour. They provide coffee or tea. Oftentimes the beverage or the dessert, you know, is representative of a culture of the international students here on campus. That kind of gives the international students here on campus an opportunity, right, to be a kind of cultural expert, which feels really good for a foreign student who's who's, oftentimes, not the cultural expert, right? Where they are. And this is true not only for students, but of faculty as well. And so what tends to happen is, as someone becomes a cultural expert, they're then elevated, on campus. And when people see them, they see them actually. They see more than just an image, right? They get to understand who this person is as an individual. They get to understand this person culturally. And as we all know, we all work so much with people from all around the world. And knowing just a little bit about a culture goes a long way, right? It goes a long way to kind of break the ice, to establish kind of a bond, and to kind of make the way for kind of more deeper exchange and exploration. Okay. All right. So speaking of coming together to relax, we're going to get really comfortable now. Okay. All right. So I'd like to guide you through a self-reflection exercise. So is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Yes, I like this plurilingual. You can say yes, but in any language, right? You can say evet in any language. So the rationale behind this exercise is to use the breath to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, or the part of our autonomic nervous system that is responsible for rest and relaxation. This also shifts our brainwave patterns from beta brainwave, as we see here, okay? That's more kind of like alert. And alertness is good, right? I want you to be alert as you're watching my presentation, okay? We need to be alert when we're focusing on things. But we have this alpha, and this is a little bit slower of a brainwave pattern. And what tends to happen in this alpha brainwave pattern is that we can tend to see the bigger picture of things, right? So where beta is more kind of like a focused flashlight, alpha is more like a floodlight, okay? And you get to kind of get back and you have the kind of big ideas about things, right? I have a feeling that you do this a lot, Ramin. You probably look at the sea and you have big idea. You're a big idea kind of guy, So it's important to have big ideas, okay? And as well as to have more focused intention. So for this purpose of a kind of guided reflection, we're going to apply a little bit of breath work in order to kind of drop down a little bit into this alpha state. Okay. Okay, so does that sound good to you all?
Sure.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So let me just get my cursor back here. Okay, so if you'd like to participate here in the room and online, I'd like to invite you to just close your eyes. Okay, and take 3 deep, slow breaths in through your nose, into your belly, and out through your mouth. Take a moment to notice your breath and try to relax any tension in your shoulders, hands, neck, and jaw. Just taking another deep breath in, relaxing a little bit more. I'd like you to reflect on the following questions. Don't try to think too much about them. Just observe what comes to the mind. So what are 2 or 3 of your identities? How do these identities inform and influence you as a teacher or as a learner? How can you leverage your identities and the identities of others towards building an even more inclusive and supportive community of learning in the classroom and on campus? Okay, now invite you to open your eyes. You all right? Muy bien. Okay, so if you feel comfortable with doing so, you can share your reflections with someone here at this conference. This kind of reflective practice can be a powerful tool. And like any skill, it needs to be practiced, applied, and refined. And I encourage you to continue to apply this technique yourself regularly. And, this kind of like dropping down into the alpha brain state, you can do it easily through breathing. You can also do it on a nice walk, right, in nature, right? Just listening to nice, soothing kind of sounds. But I encourage you to try to kind of get into this more relaxed, bigger picture understanding of things, as we're so focused and so, involved in our work day to day. Just to kind of reflect and see the bigger picture and ask yourself some kind of self-reflective questions on what kind of adjustments can we make and how can we utilize and express our own identities in that process so you feel part of that process. Okay, I have one last identity to share with you that I recently acquired last weekend. It also is related to why evet is my favorite word. Okay, so would you like to see it?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So it would be nice if we had the sound for this, but I think I just have to turn it up here, okay?
You'll have echo.
Okay, you might just have to like lip read. All right. There's a lot of nonverbal communication here though too. I think you'll get it. Okay, so is the video, I think the video has to play here.
Maybe you have to click another time, then it may start.
There we go.
Sevgili Ayşegül, hiç kimsenin
So what event is this?
kalmadan özgür
That's right, okay, it was a civil ceremony. It was my civil ceremony, okay? I got married last weekend. Okay, so she said evet, right, as she was supposed to. And because I didn't really understand what was going on, right, because again, I'm a low-level Turkish learner. After she said evet, I said evet right afterwards, okay? And everyone just started laughing, all right? Because it's like, take it easy, buddy, okay? We know you're excited, but there's a time and a place. So that's why evet is my favorite word, okay, currently. And I'm happy to be part of the Turkish kind of family culture and community now. So with that, let's see here. Let's see, it's going to go to the next slide. Yeah, it's really my last slide here. So that's it. I just want to thank you all. Please feel free to, stay connected with me. Again, thank you so much for the invitation. And yeah, I hope we can all stay connected. Teşekkür ederim.
I would like to thank you for this very nice presentation. It really got me thinking about many things. We'll move forward with our lunch break, and then after the lunch break, we'll be back with sessions. Sessions have their separate Zoom links. If you want to join them as a Sabancı University member, please use the links that you've received. And for those of you who are joining us through YouTube or Zoom, tomorrow we're going to have another keynote speaker. I'm as much enthusiastic about it as I was today with Professor Dr. Yazdanpanah. So see you tomorrow as well. And for the group here, we'll be proceeding to lunch. Yuki Hocam, I think I'm forgetting something. Oh, sorry, the Q&A part. I totally got carried away. Sorry.
I'm hungry, man.
Yes, culture.
Food before culture.
Food before everything else. Terribly sorry for that. Okay, anybody among the audience who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. And our moderator can let me know if we have questions from the Zoom as well. What's that?
like there are some notifications. Bazılarını direkt buraya göndermişler. Buradan kontrol edeceğiz ama o tarafta hiç yok.
Okay, great. In the meanwhile, anybody from the audience? Any questions from the audience? Okay, great. I can start with one, if that's okay with you. One of the challenges for me is this. In the past 2.5 years, we've done everything online. And from September onwards, probably we're going to do hybrid, blended, or something like that. Yes, we all want to go back to the old normal, but I don't know. I feel like some sort of digital life will stay with us. And that makes, in my humble opinion, dealing with plural realities a little bit tougher. Because now I see you in front of me. It's much better than meeting you over Zoom for the first time. So I feel more connected. I feel like I understand you more. And it's the same thing with our students, because when I see them like a small, pixelated person on my screen, I don't get their body languages correctly. I don't click with them. I don't understand what is offensive or good or bad, or how my body language transfers to them, because as educators, we need to sometimes energize the crowd, right? Does it work? I don't know through Zoom. So my question to wrap up is, what is your experience with dealing with pluralism, cultural differences, energizing the crowd, understanding the crowd through digital means?
Yeah.
That would be great for us to hear about that.
Yeah. So I think that there are, as we talked today, as you spoke about, as the Vice President spoke about, as some of you, have experienced and are speaking about today, there are challenges, there are opportunities, right? I think we're all figuring out we're experimenting, we're seeing what works. We're trying to adapt things that we've done in the past to this online environment. And we're trying to come up with maybe new ideas that are just gonna work on an online environment. So, what's interesting when you said that is, even though we're meeting each other for the first time in person, I feel like I know you, right? And we really only met like 3 times. Online. So I think that speaks to a lot. I think that you can initiate, a lot of connection online, through online formats. If they're facilitated, if the attitude is there, right, as we saw in that process model, if the knowledge and skills are there, and the ability is there to have those kind of conversations and those exchanges. So I think, being online is a great way to at least initiate this kind of exchange. And as we spoke about, students and faculty might feel more comfortable actually doing that online, that initial stage. And that initial stage, it takes time. It takes time to reflect. It's like, when people ask you, who are you? What do you want to express about yourself? What is Iran like? What is Pakistan like? What is whatever country like? Those are big questions, right? And they take time to kind of prepare. So I think this online format can actually be beneficial for that initial stage. Now, it sounds like what we're going to is more this hybrid format. And so that's going to be an opportunity, kind of like we're doing now, where we get to meet each other. And it's so much easier now that we've spoken with each other these 3 times. And I feel like you're a good friend of mine, really, I do. And so, when we meet, that can just you can hit the ground running, and you can dive into these kind of deeper, maybe more difficult and challenging conversations, right? When you do meet, that might be more appropriate, right? For like an actual face-to-face space. I also want to say something about the technology that you all have invested in the classrooms, as well as these kind of these partnerships, right, with other universities here in Turkey, as well as potentially other countries. There's opportunity there, right? There's opportunity for exchange in the classroom, between classrooms, because I'm sure other universities and classrooms have invested in similar kind of technology. So where before it was like, I remember before the pandemic, it was a good idea, it was like, yeah, let's do some kind of like exchange, online, and we'll have your students and my students. And there was all kind of technical, logistical like issues. I think one thing with the pandemic, and we've all become more comfortable with the technology. And so the technology has become better and easier to use. So I would say that, again, there's opportunities, there's challenges, and they just all have to be used appropriately.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the crowd or from the online crowd? Okay, no. But then I'm going to hijack this opportunity one more time. There was a moment in which I felt like, oh, we don't have a systematic way of dealing with this kind of a thing. And it was actually an interaction with the School of Languages. So we have the School of Languages. Jacqueline Hoji is the director of that, and it kind of is the place that runs our academic English and various other languages educational system. The interaction was about how to improve freshman courses and stuff like that. And there I realized that the more internationalized we become, we have more kinds of speaking English. And let me be more specific about this. I mean, accents. Like people coming from different backgrounds in Turkey have different English accents. If you were abroad in a PhD in one country, you'll have a particular accent. If you were in another country, you'll have another accent. And how we are going to deal with that, how we're going to be welcoming about that is a puzzle that I realized that I haven't thought about before. Because sometimes a professor delivers a wonderful content, but he has a very heavy, I don't know, Greek, Indian, Pakistani, Turkish accent. And I realized in that meeting that sometimes that's a professional problem for other colleagues and sometimes students. How to deal with that, how to address that is something I realized that I didn't think about much. So in your experiences in the US primarily, but you've been also in Vietnam and other places, I think you must have encountered this. We can't be alone in this, you know, as Sabancı. Can you have any, can you delve on this? Do you have any experiences to share about this different kinds of English coexisting in the same institution, how to deal with that? That's the question.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so it's a very relevant question. It's not just a question that you all are dealing with, but it's a relevant question just globally, you know, this world Englishes. So as a language guy, accents are beautiful. So I think it's really not about accent, but it's about clarity, right? So I think that's kind of a mindset that's important to set the tone with, as far as looking at accents as something that's beautiful, as an opportunity, right, to understand what are the cultural assets that this person is bringing. Because automatically, if this person has an accent, we all have accents, by the way, yeah, right? Let's be curious about that, right? What's the person's story? You know, where did they study, right? What was their experience with studying abroad? How did that shape and form their identity? So that's one way to kind of just like set the tone of saying, this person has, you know, a Pakistani English accent, okay? This person has a Farsi kind of Persian accent. Different Turkish speakers have different accents. So I think I think you hit on something that's very important, because oftentimes people feel ashamed of their accent. And that's horrible. You know, this is such a way that our communication is so intimate. You know, if we feel ashamed of how we sound, I mean, what is that doing? You know, what is that doing for your self-confidence? And how does that limit your ability to be, you know, a scholar? How does that limit your ability to be a professor? How does that limit your confidence, you know, to come out here and to make speeches, to connect with people? So I think you're right on with that. And I think that, you know, that needs to be addressed explicitly. And know that the culture here at Sabancı is welcoming, right, of diversity. It's welcoming of diverse accents, right? And you're looking at diversity as assets, right, to leverage in making this university continue to be the top university, right? Because we're in a globalized world now where it looks like this. It looks like us in this room. That's the reality, right? So I think it's setting the tone of saying, hey, we're normalizing, you know, different accents, and we're valuing that, and then showing kind of examples of how you can do that. I showed some examples in my presentation, but I have full confidence in the faculty here that can come up, and you, right, that can come up with other examples that fit the context and the needs of the university.
Can I build on that? In your experience, does that kind of a welcoming attitude happen on its own as a part of the culture? Or is it kind of also embedded in, I don't know, rules or aims or something like that? In your experience with other institutions, do they deal with it like ad hoc, or are there systems that say, this is who we are, we're welcoming, here's the text that says it, kind of an attitude?
Right. I think that the best models of education, they do deal with it explicitly, right? And they're welcoming of their foreign students, they're welcoming of their foreign faculty. And because again, what tends to happen if you don't deal with it explicitly, we tend to minimize, right? We tend to minimize differences. One, because we think that, you know, not bringing something up is going to make everyone feel more comfortable. But what that tends to do is that it just doesn't address the kind of elephant in the room, right? And so I think as, you know, administrators especially, I think it's really important to set the tone and to set the culture, you know, explicitly, right? So I think explicitness is what I've seen as the best models on campuses, you know, in my experience in the United States as well as internationally. They do that in a very public, open, and explicit way, and it is part of the kind of culture of the campus. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Oh, you have a question? Great.
All right. So thank you for your talk. I mean, it made me remember something. I think around a year ago, I received an email from one of our international students. His name was Hussein, I think from Pakistan. And he was my student when I was still an assistant. So I was like teaching discussions, etc. And then he wrote to me, he said, thank you for making me feel at home in Turkey, because you somehow were the only one who understood what the international students needed. But this student somehow recognized that in me without me explicitly doing something. I was thinking about it. What did I do? I have no clue. I did not do that anything like consciously or so. But apparently this student felt that there was such a lack and recognized that in me, I guess, somehow also being an international student here. So what I'm trying to say is, I mean, indeed, should this be something we should be more consciously doing? Exactly what Emre just asked. Because apparently students do need it. And this student explicitly stated that. And that was the only moment I realized that maybe indeed that was something that they needed and that is apparently lacking. So yeah, I guess it's kind of a similar question, but how could we do that on an individual level? Because apparently I did something, but I have no clue what still. So
well, just in our brief conversation, you know, about your experience as, you know, an international student, and then someone who's lived here in Turkey now for 12 years and has a family here. I mean, your perspective is so fascinating to me, you know, being a language learner, being someone who's dealt with all kind of cultural contexts that most people don't. And so I would think that that kind of comes through, you know, in your teaching. You said that it's probably like unconscious, but you've really lived it, right? And you know it, you understand it. So it can be things in subtle ways, and just like you're listening, right? And you're recognizing that. I would think that kind of came through for the student. And so I think that it's important for us as educators to realize again that we all tend to kind of minimize the differences, and it's not just for international students, it's also for Turkish students. You know, Turkish students are diverse as well, right? They're coming from diverse backgrounds, beliefs, hometowns. I mean, just in the friends that I've made here, they love talking about like what hometown they're from and how the food's different, you know, and different kinds of things like that, right? And it's fascinating. So I think what that does, it kind of puts everyone on the same playing field as far as having like a common shared experience. So it's not necessarily just singling out the international students, but it's kind of getting everyone to say, hey, everyone has these kind of pluralistic identities, you know? Let's relate across this discussion of identity. And when you said that, that made me remember an experience I had as a teacher where it was a teacher education program where there are international students as well as domestic, you know, students from the United States. And I put students in groups often, and there was something, I can't remember what sparked it, but one of the international students started crying. And I was like, oh boy, you know, what's happening here? You know, I did not see this coming at all. And we just stopped and said, let's talk, you know, what's going on? And all of the international, honestly, this was like a chain reaction. Almost all the other international students started crying. And it was that they felt that when they were in groups, they didn't feel like they were on equal ground, okay? American students in general, and this is a generalization, but the culture is like, you should kind of like jump in, right? You should participate, where in other cultures, especially the cultures that were represented in that classroom, it's kind of like you wait. You wait to be like called on, right? Someone will ask to kind of bring you in. That wasn't happening in these groups. And these students, the international students, they just felt so frustrated about it. No one saw that coming, right? I didn't see that coming. This cultural expert, right? Didn't see that coming. The American students, they weren't at fault. They didn't understand that. They didn't see that. And the international students didn't see that, you know, until it came to this like breaking point. So I think you bring up a great point, you know, and that's why I kind of mentioned this like visible aspects of culture that we can see, right? But it's like the cultural iceberg is what it's called. We just see the tip of the iceberg, but the majority, 95% of the iceberg is underwater. It's the invisible aspects of culture that we need to be explicit about. So I think as educators, we need to, when we're planning our syllabi, to make room. And that's why I mentioned, I think an easy way to do that, if you do like a needs assessment, you know, something like that, have just like a meet and greet between students and try to integrate, you know, as simple as that, some questions that allow students to talk about their identity, right? To talk about their cultures of learning, about their expectations. And I would say as professors, we need to model that, right? We need to be clear as far as like, what are our expectations, right? Of student engagement, both in kind of groups outside of the class, so that students can understand. And we're good at modifying, we're good at adapting. I mean, this past 2.5 years, just look at the civilization of humanity. We're pretty good as human beings at adapting. Okay, but that explicitness is needed. Some models are needed, some guidelines, and some practice, some scaffolded kind of supported activities are needed to get people. Trust needs to be developed, all right? It just doesn't happen. So those things to kind of develop trust, to know each other's names, to know where you come from, these kind of things as far as like identity, and that can be identity as far as like if you're in a history class, why are you studying history? You know, tell me about your history. Language, how long have you been studying? You know, what's your history about studying? I mean, all kinds of things that professors are going to be able to do to understand the background experience and the rationale for why you're there in that classroom is a good place to start. Yeah, so thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we can now proceed for lunch. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.